Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Virginia, my co-host Tommy John, our dear friend Jules, who's a default co-host. Welcome to RP Book Club. I don't know if anybody else has read the Communist Manifesto, but at Real Progressives, we've always focused on modern monetary theory. But over the course of the past few years, we've realized that without understanding power, nothing gets done. It doesn't matter how much you know about money and how money works. If you have no power to do anything with it, you're in the situation we're in today, where you don't get the services you need, and you get a whole lot of things you don't need, like supporting genocide around the world, supporting imperialism around the world. So the Communist Manifesto was written in 1848. It is still, sometimes it feels like it was written yesterday. The main difference that I'm aware of is that things have got even worse because we've reached the era of finance capitalism. And I know that whenever Marx talks about capitalism, you mainly think about industry, factories, workers, and the rich guy from the monopoly board, with the top hat. It's a whole different world today. You have a ruling class that looks like us and wears T-shirts and and controls $1 trillion worth of investments and politicians. I find that Marx and Engels are really hard to read. This one isn't so bad. Some of their work is really dense. Anyone who's ever looked at Capital can back me up on that. But Tommy John, tell them about Real Progressives and where to find our stuff. I'm just going to look for something while you're doing that.
Well, I would suggest go to our website, realprogressives.org. There's just a treasure trove of revolutionary material there that intersects, what we do, MMT, macroeconomic literacy with class analysis. And it seems like you're right. That's what we've been doing over the years, is going more from strictly the macroeconomic angle and I guess fusing it with that crucial class analysis lens. Because you're right, without the class analysis, you'll be sitting there going, we just need to get a few more progressives in, and we got to go tell Joe Biden that, hey, this is how federal finance works. We can afford stuff. Yeah, we've got a couple YouTube channels, Real Progress in Action and Real Progressives, Facebook, Twitter. We got Substack that's really awesome. So go over and subscribe to that and drop us a comment.
Do we have a podcast?
Oh yeah, podcast, the flagship podcast, Macro and Cheese. It drops every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, and it's really great. It'd be cool if you could go over and just click on it and watch it and help us get it out there. Maybe leave us a comment and share it around.
On Tuesday nights, we also have something we call Macro and Chill. Jules suggested it's kind of like Netflix and Chill, which is how it got its name. We listen to usually the most recent episode of Macro and Cheese and play it back for 15 minutes or so, discuss, play the next 15 minutes and discuss. Now, we don't have an expert leading this book club. Often, because we're doing MMT books, we'll have one of the economists with us. But this is just us talking. And I guess it doesn't matter. There are no bad ideas, no bad questions. We're all going to just contribute. None of us are experts on it. Many volunteers at Real Progressives aren't communists, aren't socialists. And as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't matter. The point is that we need to understand power. As I said before, we need to and today power is about capitalism. It's about the capitalist class. And sometimes people get turned off by words like capitalism and class because they're used so often and misused, but I don't know what else to call them. But the point is, if we are going to be activists, if we are committed to social change, we have to understand this stuff. You don't have to become anti-capitalist. I am. Commie John is. Jules
Yeah,
is.
you will.
But it's up to you. I believe that the more you learn about it, the more you will realize that we can't make significant change within the capitalist system. But I'm not an expert. Prove me wrong. Um, but and the one other thing is in the Communist Manifesto, Marx is the best at explaining capitalism. The Communist Manifesto also has the actual manifesto, the list of demands of the Communist Party. And I think that's important too. We'll go through that in, I guess, the third section, Commie John. Um, uh, let's talk about them. What's reasonable, what's unreasonable. Jules always says, I think people will be surprised at how reasonable how many they agree with. So, okay, let's get started. Like I said, questions, comments, put them in the Q&A chat. Okay, so there are some comments in the Q&A. Let's see.
So Yelena, if you want to unmute yourself and ask these, feel free. But if you put them in here because you want us to read them.
Oh, I think we have to promote her. Yeah. We met Yelena at the Esha RP Live. Yelena was one of our guests there. Hi, Yelena.
I just promoted her to a panelist.
Okay, now I got to do.
There she is. And if you don't want to hop on and read them, I can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So Yelena says, I'm sick and tired of both fake narratives on cultural Marxism and anti-wokeness from the right, and any exclusively social issue virtue signaling that passes as leftism. Both are tools to distract from real economic and material conditions of the working class and sow division. I was born and raised in a socialist country, but to this day, I do not understand the difference between socialist and communist economic organization from strictly material/economic viewpoint. And continued, she says, I have compatriots who are foaming at the mouth that communism was against religion and religious practices were forbidden. But one, I do not believe that. Look at the Orthodox Church in Russia today. It wasn't destroyed. Two, even if it was, so I see no reason why an economically equitable and socially inclusive society would be against anything except capitalism. I'm not religious in the legacy religion way, but as a socialist, I am open to unseen human and cosmic dimensions. Continued, why would Marxism or communism have anything to do with private lives or explorations of any of its citizens? If everyone has material basics for growth, education, jobs, healthcare, etc., why would anyone bother with inner life of its people?
Great.
Bingo. That was a great little thread there.
Yeah, thank you, Yelena. And we'll talk more about this when we get to the section on, I guess, on the demands of communism. But, before we began, I said that the manifesto could have been written yesterday. Well, there are definitely some parts that, that show its age. But in terms of, I think, in terms of the whole sort of overview of, and to me, I call myself a Marxist, and to me, the most important part of that is that to learn this view, this historical materialist view, that you see history as a series of economic systems that develop based on progress. And when people want to argue about all the good things about capitalism, the fact is that Marx and Engels don't deny that capitalism was once very progressive. It's a huge advance over feudalism, but not all of it was better. There were some. Nothing is absolute. Everything is dialectical. So and the other thing that happens is each successive economic system brings some of the pieces of the past. I think one thing we Americans do, and I can only speak for us, one thing we do a lot is confuse political life, political decisions, political acts with economic acts. So things like, wars, things like, war, imperialism. We see it as one nation being angry at the other nation. I mean, there's still people who believe that the US fights to protect democracy. And it's always, 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 it can always be traced to some kind of economic interest. The other thing I learned from Marx and Engels is that the capitalist class is not a monolith. There are contradictions within it. So there are vertical contradictions between the ruling class, the owners, and the workers, but there are also contradictions among them, and those also determine policy. For example, and I tend to oversimplify things because I like to sort of understand it at a macro level. But for example, the segment of the capitalist class that builds, fighter jets and bombs and aircraft carriers is always going to be interested in an aggressive foreign policy. That's how they make their money. As long as there's conflict around the world, the government will continue to order aircraft carriers and tanks and bombs. If your industry is about selling paper napkins and sneakers, and then you're not interested in building hotels like Donald Trump or casinos, golf courses. Then you're interested in peace. However, again, it's never quite so cut and dry, because you also need to keep the world open for cheap labor, cheap resources, markets. So there can still be some need for aggressive foreign policy. So, but it's important that we see that those are the things we look to. What are the economic interests? What is driving any particular policy? And again, the answer might not be simple or cut and dry, but instead of worrying about whether it's the Democrats or Republicans or Fox News or CNN, to always think, sort of look under the surface and look at what's really happening in what Marx called the base, that the economic base. It's where everything is happening. People are working, that the labor is exploited and alienated. Does anybody else have a comment, by the way?
And that's another reason why MMT literacy is so important, and understanding how the economics work. Because if you understand that, pretty much everything comes down to the econ, But and I want to say there's that one spot in there to where how the employer is reduced to giving cash wages to the workers, and then that's divvied out by the other elements of society, like the landlords and pawnbrokers. Man, that was like it was written yesterday. Oh my God.
Right.
Exactly rip. I figured Grumbine, if he's got some time, he could jump in here. And
while Steve is speaking, I'm gonna promote Susan to panelist. That way, if you want to speak after Steve, you can do so.
No, I just wanted to bring up the point that, a lot of what Marx wrote, Engels had to come behind and decide whether or not he was going to edit it or not and update it with more current language. And even in Das Kapital, he, in the second, third editions, et cetera, and all the other translations, he
Mhm.
made the point that they thought about updating it to language that everybody would be current with, but he said that it would always happen. And so he decided that it would be better to keep it in the language that Marx wrote it in during the time that it was done and allow others to do that transposition of, current modern language. So I wouldn't let the antiquated language throw you off. But this is where having a quote unquote class analysis, it's not just a word or a phrase, it's a
Mhm.
thing, right? You understand that in the modern vernacular, what is our class? What does our interest in you said something about the military, making, if you're in the business of making bombs and aircraft carriers, then you're always going to be looking for an aggressive military stance because that's how you butter your bread.
Mhm.
And so that's your class interests. But what happens when sometimes inadvertently the class interest of the capitalists ends up accidentally being within the class interest of labor? And I find it fascinating, and you can see this with corporate unions, where certain workers, the idea will be, that they have a shared interest. There's more money coming into the company, therefore there's more work coming in, and therefore the workers are making, more money and having more hours or whatever. So they may see it in their interest that they're doing these things, while simultaneously the larger working class is hurt by that corporate union success. You could see that kind of thing happen in, a few elections ago when the restaurant workers, I don't remember the exact union, but out there in Las Vegas, how they were like, we don't want Medicare for all. We got a Cadillac plan. And so they shit all over the fullness of the working class in advancement of theirs, which, this is where that complexity comes. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there. That's all I got to say at the moment.
No, I think it's really helpful. And, Steve, I think we have to train ourselves to accept the complexity of things. We're always looking for very simple explanations, cut and dry. And one of the sort of brilliant things about our society, about our modern capitalism, is how much it confuses us. I mean, on even the simplest level, what the working class in the United States has is very different. The standard of living, the quality of life is very different from the working class in India, for example. And it kind of makes people identify with the ruling class. We've all heard people say, socialism means I won't have my flat screen TV and I won't have my, you know, we can't have quote unquote private property. And and we'll get to that later. But people confuse personal property, like, my car, my TV, whatever, with private property, which is industry. Um,
Well,
so,
real quick, I wanted to add one more
yeah,
thing to this. And this is like,
yeah.
to me, I think of communism and socialism without an understanding of MMT
Hmm.
as another failure. And I think of MMT without working class, consciousness to be a failure, or at least incomplete. You know what I mean? Like all of them are incomplete. And so when you think about this, the ability of a currency issuing government to provide a standard set for all workers, but made by workers, not made by the capitalists to decide for the workers, but the
Hmm.
workers themselves being able to have that agency through democracy or whatever, of which we have none of that here now. And so, you're going to find that everything you have to say to people outside of this little cocoon are going to be wondering what the hell you're talking about, because everybody's been so conditioned to fight for their own little 10-inch section of turf. And
Mhm.
to be very, very hoardery and very controlling of their own resources. And, this is where private property becomes such an important thing because after all, you're taking my stuff and I worked hard for it and all. So this is where an understanding of modern money kicks in and allows us to provide that standard to all without concern about cost. But the labor, and this is super important to understand, as long as you're in a monetary economy, people will do what they want for that currency. So the idea of the people choosing to compensate and create a new market, create a new service or public service or whatever, that whole thing can be done collectively through public spending directly to those work groups. So it's not like anybody's getting screwed. It's not like there's any worker losing their agency. They're being given work and the demand that goes with that work as well. I think this is a fundamental, a new thing, right? This is a new thing, something that Marx never thought of because it really wasn't a thing at the time, and something that the average person today is so conditioned to be a soloist and die alone and die without help and worry and be in precarity. It's almost impossible. So these are the things I hope people get from this when they're listening to what the working class's manifesto is all about. You can get rid of the word communist and say the working class manifesto.
Mhm.
I think that would be an easier way for people to view this so that loaded word communism doesn't sidetrack them from listening. Anyway,
Mhm.
that's it.
No, thank you. And that point of isolate, I mean, Martin, alienation is a word we associate with Marx. The worker is alienated from his work, and he talks about the old guilds, and you would be a shoemaker or a what do you call it, spinning wool or weaving, or where you were producing something that, and how today it's factories. And again, in the US, it's not so much like that, but the point is, the farther and farther alienated people are, not only from their labor, but also from each other. And look how much effort goes into keeping us as little individual units apart from each other. Uh, for one thing, that, Steve, you kind of used the word feeling like you have to be a hoarder, because that the government isn't going to take care of you. That the company you work for isn't going to take care of you, if something happens. So everybody has to look out for themselves. It makes you crazy. It makes you paranoid. It makes you unempathetic, unable to, you dull your sympathy or empathy, so that your goals won't be interfered with by those kinds of things. Take care of my family first, then maybe I can look at you. I have a nephew who was living, he and his wife and kids were living in an area where his particular craft, he could have gotten really good work. They had to move because they had an autistic son, and they had to move to a state that had better services, because you can't afford those privately unless you're extremely wealthy. But, having to make life decisions based on the lack of services, it's crazy, and it's common, unfortunately.
Well, Susan's here. Uh, Looks like her mic's on. You
Oh,
there,
go ahead.
Susan?
Yeah,
Yep,
go
I'm here.
ahead. Okay.
Yeah, when my mic wasn't on, did somebody read my question or it was not addressed?
Yeah, go ahead, go for it.
Okay. I don't, because I got cut off, I don't see my question. So if you see it, can you read it and then I will say something
Oh,
else?
Oh, yeah. Okay, you say, I have a very basic question because I've never heard a simple enough answer to understand it, or an answer that makes sense to me. Capitalism needs to profit, yes, But why does capitalism have the need for ever bigger and bigger profits? Capitalism's rapacious greed has become deadly. Is it just the pathological side of capitalism that has become acceptable? Well, this is, Marx does talk about, and, Marx and Engels have books about, books like Value, Price, and Profit or Capital that go, they're, to me, they look like algebra, all these formulas for, capital, price, labor value, and all these formulas to determine those things. But the capitalism has a tendency for the rate of profit to fall. So they're always seeking increases. But even without a Marxist explanation, look at a modern, like a US corporation or international corporation. You have stockholders who always want an increase on their investment, or they'll go elsewhere. They'll sell those stocks and buy others. So you constantly need to keep earning more and more and more. And the way to do that is, cut wages or find a source of cheaper wages, find sources of cheaper raw materials, which again means extracting from the global South. And raising prices. Those are kind of the two big ways to increase profit. And, so we call it greed, but I think that's simplistic. It's not just people sitting around, how can I screw over everybody? I mean, plenty of people have investments in stocks, and everybody wants to see as much return as possible. So it's not like, it's not so focused. It's what I was saying about the working class in an industrialized country like this, having certain privileges. Those are the things people want to protect. Nobody wants to reduce their standard of living. So it's all sort of designed so that everything supports this system, which is what makes it so hard, as Steve was talking about, it makes it so hard for people to look at it from a different angle.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Question. So is it basically, this is an oversimplification, just to be short and quick here. So is it basically the stock market's fault? If the stock market did not exist, would there be an ongoing need for ever increasing profits?
I have no idea. Maybe somebody else can get into that. I mean, I think very simplistically. So, but it seems like if the stock market is about publicly owning corporations, right? It's about so if it were just, me owning my own company, my own factory, it would seem that once I reached a certain level of wealth, I wouldn't need any more. It's like I have more than enough to ever spend in my lifetime, my kids' lifetimes, whatever. But that's not how it works. So I really don't know. It always,
like,
yeah,
it's
go
like
ahead.
a casino for rich people. I mean, it's not necessary. It's just one of those.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You broke. Okay, yeah. That's how I've always seen it. Go ahead.
Mhm.
No, it's just another one of their things, almost like I don't know, like treasuries or whatever, or Bitcoin or whatever. It's something that another tool they've made up to
Another way to make money.
to fleece the working class and increase their wealth. But yeah, and I wanted to go back to what like Steve started talking about with the culinary workers in Vegas and kind of what the conversations got up to. It all goes back to like the false scarcity narrative, this idea that if to get more or to get something, it's going to take from someone else, and then just the individualist narrative, man, it's all wrapped up into this is why things are like they are, and capitalism continues. It's not bad people necessarily, but just kind of that mindset that there's not enough to go around. And if somebody else is getting something, they're going to take it from me or whatever. And
Mhm.
that's why I understand the MMT and the class
Mm-hmm.
analysis is so important.
One other thing we have to remember about the stock market is that, again, this started from a real need. I want to go build a factory. I need to find money to do it. So you go to the bank, you take out loans, or you get people to buy into it. Those become your shareholders. So, these things all started for a reason, whether, however legitimate or illegitimate. But then they kind of take on a life of its own. There's a quote, oh no, that there's somebody writing about the Communist Manifesto was likening the capitalist class to, the sorcerer's apprentice. You untap this thing and then you can't control it. It just takes over. And so it's no longer about, the individual. Anyway, that's
Thank
it.
you.
I didn't explain that very well, but yeah. Listen, people are writing in the chat and I'm having a hard time keeping up with it because I can't think of it. I can't be in two places at once. I'm old. So
And Yelena threw a little more in the Q&A if you want to.
yeah, Yelena, can you talk now or do you want us to read it?
Let's see. Well, she declined, it looks
Okay.
like.
Okay.
So
Go
see.
ahead.
Yeah, we'll start here. Another idea. Representative politics has been long dead. Agreed. If it ever was alive. Most likely it was designed as a means to control the masses. Absolutely. I mean, look at the guys that, started it. A bunch of white slave owners. I'd be totally okay with humanity-centered politics that could be improved over time as consciousness and technological conditions change, and never see or hear another fucking politician ever again. Amen. Even if nation states remain, it can be done with help of MMT. Diverse cultures and languages are examples of beauty and diversity of human existence. But under capitalism and greedy psychopaths at the top, we don't get to enjoy it. Instead, we are looking into dystopian monoculture with Western neoliberalism, fascism, march across all life on this planet. Fucking A.
That's so true.
Oh yeah.
And again, these are, when we start talking about the communist demands, and that will be a very good opportunity to talk about what are the possibilities, what kind of society do we want, how can we envision it. These are really good points. Did anybody else have something in the chat or?
Let's see.
Now this, if you come to our Tuesday evenings, Macro and Chill, you will, we play sections and then talk and then play back another section and then talk. With book club, we're only going to play back at the start of the session. And Kami John, I'm kind of glad. I wanted to make this just 2 sessions. But you said we should break it. It made more sense to break it into 3. And I think a half an hour of listening is kind of the perfect amount, to absorb.
I had considered suggesting that maybe, okay, well, each section's about a half hour, and maybe while it's going on, maybe if there's a spot that anybody decides is like, oh, let's talk about that, we could stop the video, but that would have been a nightmare. So this seems like the better way.
Yeah, my problem is something is said in the first 5 minutes, and by the 25th minute, I've forgotten it, but that's me. I was thinking about, was it this week's Macro and Cheese or last week's, talking about how Keynes envisioned that, as again, because capitalism is so becomes more and more productive, that we would eventually be able to produce everything we need in a shorter amount of time, and therefore the workers would benefit. And I remember that when I was young, people talked about, by the time I was old, the work week would be, 10, 20 hours a week, and people would have time, with their families. People would have time to go and, write poetry or become artists or go surfing or, whatever. And of course that those ideas have nothing to do with the reality of the needs of capitalism.
Yep, I believe that was in I don't
Bill
think it was
Mitchell?
I think it was in Bill Mitchell, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they talked about this in the first chapter of the
Right.
manifesto too. They said,
Right.
eventually the bourgeoisie is going to run into that conundrum to where they've almost, and I'm speaking verbatim, conquered scarcity, I guess, or produced enough for everyone. But then it's like that doesn't work to keep capitalism going. It's
So
kind of like,
capitalism, the quote Tommy John put on the screen, under capitalism, food isn't produced to feed people, it's produced to make a profit. When it's not profitable to feed people, we let them starve. Even when our labor has conquered scarcity, capitalism must manufacture scarcity. It must manufacture scarcity in order to justify its existence. And don't forget, food sometimes is produced to feed people because you need a healthy working class. So even if the food itself isn't directly for profit, you need to keep the working class alive because you need workers in your factory. But at some point, Jonathan wrote an article about this messing with prices of necessities. It's based on the work of Isabella Weber, but this idea that there are certain things like healthcare, food, energy, certain things that can't be subject to the whims of the ruling class and price fixers, because if you don't have them, you die. If they become too expensive, you die. And as we see, there's less and less concern about that. Okay, Greg said something. I always love what Greg says. Greg, if you can talk, that would be great.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
No, I was just adding to what you guys were saying that food is not produced to feed people, it's produced for profit. We turn about a third of our corn into ethanol, about 450 trillion calories. And meanwhile, 9 million people starve to death in the world every year, a deficit of 200 some odd trillion calories. A problem we could easily solve, but instead we burn it and it saves us, 25, 50 cents per gallon at the pump.
That's insane. Yeah, it's insane and it's logical. It's logical. If the system is organized around profit, then that makes perfect sense. As human beings, it doesn't make sense.
capitalism is inhumane. Example.
There's one other thing that Marx and Engels talk very much about sort of historical materialism, historical change, and how certain every economic system reaches a point where it no longer makes sense, where like he talks about the expansion of markets, the steam engine, the what do you call it, assembly, what do you call that, modern factories,
Manufacturing or industrial,
assembly line kind, those kinds of things, and the old feudal relations of production just no longer made sense. And that's why these revolutions occurred around the world. The French Revolution, a whole bunch of revolutions in England, and what we call the Industrial Revolution.
so maybe AI and automation is going to be our next one.
Exactly. It might be the next thing that says that, part of the way capitalism is probably going to have to end is because of just what we were talking about. That in order to keep achieving those profits, it'll have to kill off the people and the unnecessary people. And hopefully we, the people, won't accept that, but
Humbling under its own weight right now. Cheryl Van Epps has a little something. I didn't know if you wanted to come on.
come on
Cheryl,
up, Cheryl. We always
one of
love
our
hearing
favorites.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, it really seems to me that we've been sliding down a slippery slope. I just made a comment about quality. We've lost quality in just about everything we produce. We're settling for our fellow Americans to be suffering instead of viewing them as our teammates. They're our fellow Americans. So my question is, what's it going to take for folks, I said a bitch slap, to wake them up and see themselves as one on a team, that we're on the same side? So I'll ask that question and let you answer. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I wish I had the answer. I mean, like I said before, all these resources are devoted to keeping us separate and hating each other and arguing with each other and not acknowledging our common interests. If you work for a wage, you are working class. If you don't own what you're working for, you are working class. But look at the difference in the working class. If you're at the top management level, if you're a professor, if versus a factory worker, a waitress, an Uber driver, which starts confusing the wage relationship. But yeah, so all of those things keep us separate and keep some people superior to others. So
yeah, another reason why we need to learn MMT and realize that we got enough. It's not there's not that scarcity, and to answer Cheryl, that's what we're trying to do, is get people to realize that you're not on your own.
We have another question. Kami John, would you read that in your beautiful voice from
Well, how can I decline? All right, we have an anonymous attendee. Says, some background. We already produce to levels that would allow us to be post-scarcity with all the basic needs of life. The maintenance of profit is why there's still artificial scarcity in things like chips and computer storage. Virginia, how do you envision the power of the currency issuer and regulator, our federal government, or a new transitional ML state, being used to redistribute the fruits of production while doing degrowth?
Well, I'm glad you asked about that. I am not the expert on degrowth, but I don't know who you are, but I urge you to listen to our Macro and Cheese episodes with Jason Hickel, the most recent one with Bill Mitchell, which was just last week, because they talk about degrowth. And there's confusion around degrowth. Some people think degrowth means that we'll be subjected to more scarcity, but it's really about. And again, I go back to Marx introducing this concept of scientific socialism, with planning and sense and an acknowledgement of what are necessities and what aren't. And how can we, there's no reason we can't all live a really comfortable life, and it's just a matter of, there's so many brilliant people in the world. I'm not one of them, but I believe that they can figure this out. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer that question. Maybe Steve, can you take it?
Well, I imagine that if you think about it, having healthcare for all is an extremely deflationary event. Just giving everyone access, it takes away a bunch of that middleman overhead that is really not built to produce benefit. It's produce benefit denial, if you will. The other thing would be high speed rail, getting absolute efficient transportation, public transportation, taking over certain industries that are national needs versus national wants and streamlining them. So you don't have 450,000 different versions of it. You have one. The opportunity to go after monopoly practices that create that raising costs and stuff, which add to that GDP, which is what degrowth is talking about, is a rise of GDP. So really, at the end of the day, GDP is an indiscriminate number. It measures everything from the number of bankruptcy lawyers that got paid to, the amount of work we put into cleaning up fossil fuel spills in the Gulf. So, GDP, by regulating things and so forth, and by I really look to nationalize public services, or at least have them paid solely by the federal government, and put it out there in such a way that the federal government rewards those models that benefit that degrowth movement and benefit all of society. The other thing that I would do immediately would be get rid of patent protections on a lot of things, or at least shrink the years down. And anything that's developed by the federal government, instead of creating another advertising opportunity and a whole middleman and private sector, I would take pharmaceuticals and have them produced by the nation and distributed as a part of the commons, including the internet and things like that. And that way, everyone is sharing in the benefits of this. Because I'll just use DARPANet as an example. The federal government and the Department of Defense built the internet, and they built it for military purposes. And then when they realized there was a commercial purpose, instead of just keeping it public, they went ahead and gave it to MCI UUNet, and UUNet created the quote unquote commercial internet that we know today. And that was what gave rise to all these private groups, trying to, think about all the efforts to try and limit bandwidth and limit access and stuff like that. All that came from, privatization. And the federal government, but the government doesn't serve us, right? So this is where it becomes a challenge. You have to recognize who's got the keys to the car, who's got the steering wheel. And right now, you've got people like Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump and all the other cray-crays that I think they're actors. I think they're actors that support the will of the people above them. And but that's neither here nor there. That's my belief, and I challenge someone to point me in a different direction, show me otherwise. But in any event, as far as the global South goes, which is part of this degrowth thing, right? Remember, we predate upon them to get cheap prices, to get cheap goods and services. We use their labor, we use their natural resources, and part of this is allowing the global South to catch up, to build what it needs to build to be sustainable, while we go about building out public works to limit the private sector's influence on them. There's probably a much longer answer to it than that, but to me, that's really the answer to your question, is that we in the global North and our opulence, it's not like we stop being opulent. Actually, what happens is all of our lives get better, except maybe the rich don't grow as fast. That all of our lives do. We have access to everything, free. And when I say free, I mean like just as part of being a citizen, part of being a person in this country. And before we get into the immigrant side of this, one of the other things about this is that we know that with a federal job guarantee, we can let pretty much anyone into the country we want. And if we need to produce whatever it takes to fulfill those individuals' needs by nationalizing those services and eliminating all the overhead, we could take care of immigrants as well without, being xenophobic and building walls like Trump and Biden are doing, and and people that don't understand economics tend to push for, right? So, I mean, there's so much. I mean, I could spend all day talking about this, and we probably should at some point. I hope I answered your question.
One of the things that I love, and again, I like to really visualize these things at kind of their simplest level, but the federal job guarantee, that as a socialist, the minute I understood the federal job guarantee, I got excited, because that to me is kind of a model for that kind of, for a society with fair distribution. And what I'm talking about is this idea that the currency issuer pays the wages of everybody who's working, and guarantees a minimum
Well,
income
stop
to
stop for just a second
yeah.
on that. This is really important. So, the reason why work is profitable is because somebody can skim additional, you know, benefit from this. They can skim, unpaid wages by taking and creating a profit, but creating a product or service that they can skim that extra on. Okay, but when it comes to the job guarantee, think about it more like this. Think about it more like compensating things that just make good sense for us. They're never going to be profitable, but damn it, it would just make good sense. And I said this in one of my shows not too long. In fact, I said it in my solo podcast. If you haven't listened to this, do a solid and listen to it. But the fact is that my father died of something called progressive supranuclear palsy. In a capitalist situation, that will never be profitable. And my dad would have never been able to afford the medication if they could have created it, because there's probably, I don't know, 1,000 people out of the, or maybe even a million people out of the billions on the planet that get progressive supranuclear palsy. And so the idea of being able to do that as a public good to create that cure, I mean, that's not, there's no profit motive there. It's just for the public benefit. So if you think about it like that, think about what the job guarantee does. It's not competing with profit-based businesses. It's creating the jobs that will never be profitable, whether they be in nonprofits or whether they be just in your community. So I think that's really important, that there's no need for it to be profitable. It only produces social benefit. So from that standpoint, it's profitable in a social sense. Anyway, there you go. Go ahead, Virginia.
Sure. And what does your community need? Because a community in the desert might have very different needs from when I first learned about the job guarantee. I was in New York City, and you look at all the empty lots that are sort of filled with rubble, and think these could all be playgrounds or community gardens or something. And again, not profitable, but needed. And that as the central currency issuer, allowing the communities to determine, to communicate their own needs and manage the job guarantee. In fact, they manage their local policies. To me, that's socialism. And one thing that we notice is that some of the MMTers talk about the job guarantee as just a transitional thing. So when the business cycle is down and private industry isn't employing, then the job guarantee kicks in. And then when things come back around and they're hiring again, the job guarantee, but less people are in the job guarantee. But some of us see the job guarantee as kind of a permanent thing, potentially. So, yeah.
I just wanted to circle back to resource extraction, and like scarcity, growth, degrowth, all that. So for those who don't know, I've been very, very immersed and kind of on a path where my school is trying to for lack of a better word, mold me into an aerospace engineer, which I'm not actually going to do. But you're muted, Virginia.
You got some
Yeah.
stuff going on in your back, Artemis.
Yeah, you have to speak slowly. It kind of sounds like you're too close to the microphone, maybe. It's
Too
hard to.
close? Okay. So what I was saying is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I was saying is, like I said, I've been very immersed in like the aerospace industry from a student perspective, and like my school has a huge aerospace pipeline. And one of the things I've realized is sustainability under capitalism means literally going to space for additional real resources rather than reprioritizing the resources we already have. And I'm all for, you know, if we really need something that critically, sure. But that's why I don't know if anyone else has been following space news, but NASA has been awarding contracts left and right to establish a commercialized permanent lunar presence, including things like they want to do a railway, they want to have nuclear plants using the helium-3 in the moon's regolith. And I just think that when we think about degrowth and we think about reimagining, providing for, you know, us, it's gotten to a point where even capitalists admit the need for sustainability measures, but they're so high on their own ideology that they're literally going to send millions of us to work in space to get those resources. That's the plan. Rather than, you know, ending exploitation and waste here on this planet. And I think it's something as an MMT informed Marxist, I'm like, this is so unnecessary. But when we look at like what the manifesto was saying about like how the bourgeois chases themselves across the planet looking for new markets and new resources. Well, the planet has been chased for, I mean, the collapse of colonialism and of course the rise of neocolonialism is evidence of this, but for at least a century, there hasn't been primitive accumulation, and now we're trying to do space accumulation. I just think that it's important to realize that a lot of the rhetoric around sustainability and growth is so capitalist determined that we're literally going to space to mine the moon, mine Mars, maybe mine the asteroid belt, instead of addressing things like slave labor and child mines here on this planet. I don't know, maybe that's irrelevant, but yeah, Benjamin, you're right. They're also going to the ocean floor. They're planning on doing some deep ocean mining, and I'm just like, yeah, eventually we probably do need resources beyond this planet, but you're doing it for the wrong reasons. So yeah, that's really all I have. It's like the pursuit of growth is having us sacrifice our planet for a couple of people on the moon, and it's just really messed up.
Right, we got another one in the Q&A from Yelena. She seems to be a VIP now, so we'll get right to that. Yelena says, I get doubly mad because I lived in a country that had all the things Steve just listed: national industries, technological advancement, shared, universal healthcare, true inclusivity. Until we were first sanctioned, then bombed, and finally couped. So the last 30 years, we have puppet neoliberal government that does everything the US government dictates. My take is that the US could not allow any such successful example in Europe, just as they couldn't allow any socialist government in South America. Couldn't agree more. That's kind of the imperialism playbook, you know, like Iraq or Libya. It's like if you get socialist, you know, regime come in and try to start changing things, you know, it's going to make oil a little more expensive or whatever. You go in and coup them, put in a puppet, and keep it going.
Yeah, any country that has tried to be socialist is immediately met with opposition from the most powerful nations in the world, specifically the United States. So, I mean, it's a miracle that, you know, like Cuba has managed
Yeah.
to survive. But yeah,
I believe, if I remember right, I think the Soviet Union in the first few years, maybe the first decade, we'll say, was invaded like 15, 16 times by
Yeah.
these, you know, imperialist powers. That's what they do. They don't want it. Anything.
yeah, this could not bear it. And as you know, we've learned the and Clara Mattei talks about this, you know, the capitalist class, the capital order, was shaken by that, you know, shaken by the idea of a worker state. I mean, that threatens everything they rely on. So, yeah.
That awkward silence is starting to signal we're getting close to the end
Yeah.
here.
Yep, it's been, usually we like to keep these things to between 90 minutes and 2 hours, and we are at exactly 1 hour, 45 minutes. So this is perfect. I don't see anything else in the Q&A. I want to remind you that if you haven't listened to the podcast, hop over to realprogressives.org and go to Macro and Cheese. And but it's also on any other podcast platform, Spotify, SoundCloud, all of them. But please share it, like it, comment on it, all those things that increase the algorithms. I have no idea what that means, but I say it anyway because I know it's important. Yeah. This upcoming one is called Defining Value, and it's Randy Ray, one of the original MMT economists, talking about how you determine, because we always talk about the government as the price setter, but he's talking about how value is determined, and he talks about Marx's labor theory of value, and he talks about the liquidity theory of value. And come join us on Tuesday evening and we'll discuss it very much like we're doing here, just informal, among ourselves, no experts, just us. We are the experts.
So yeah, I mean, man, thanks for joining us, guys. This is pretty cool. About 30 people here at one point, which is pretty rad, I guess.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you all for coming. And
next week, same time, same channel.
Great. So you will receive a reminder before the next one, so you don't have to register again. You'll receive a reminder with the link, so you don't have to go searching for it. And we look forward to next week. I look forward to seeing you Tuesday evening. It's the same boring hosts, Connie, John, myself, and sometimes we have a third co-host, Jonathan, when he's not working. So yeah.
Boring but sexy. So we'll be here.
Okay.
Cool.
Thanks
for joining us, guys. Adios.